Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests today. They're all three gentlemen are from North Penn School District. We have the Safety Security Director, a School Board Director, and the Superintendent. And we'll start with Brandon. Brandon, if you wouldn't mind just providing a quick background on yourself and your quick bio and connection to this topic.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. So, as you stated, currently at North Penn School District, spent all of my professional career in the public safety space, from local law enforcement to school resource officer, and then a operations captain within the agency overseeing specialized units, including school resource officers. And then took a brief period of time to go into the public sector, or the private sector, I should say, as the director of training for a national company in the school safety space. And then joined this wonderful organization here at North Penn School District, led by Dr. Todd Bauer. So happy to be here and happy to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, Brandon. I know you've been on in the past, and we're glad that you're here again and sharing your insights with our folks. And we have a lot of school safety directors and part of our National Council of School Safety Directors participating. We also have a number of school administrators, such as Jonathan, who's the School Board Director at North Penn. So Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind just providing your background and your also role as Executive Director of Zero Now. Go figure.
Yeah, hey, I'm fortunate. Know a few people here. Thank you for all those that have joined us. I've been Executive Director since November as a founding advisory board member of Zero Now years ago. And really, it's because of realizing the type of coalition and clearinghouse and the singular purpose to get to zero harm, violence nationally in any of our education settings, because anything more than zero is just unacceptable. So a lot of this community has come together because of a sense of purpose and priorities. And it's one of the reasons why I took my experience nationally, working originally nonprofit for 15 years in at-risk youth, juvenile justice, and social and education systems. I was executive director of Cleary Center. Saw an executive director on earlier if you were waiting for us to begin. And that really opened up my eyes to what can be done for communication, data, and sharing with the community transparently what it means to have a safe and secure school that's also welcoming and vibrant. And we need to bring in all of our community members, family members, staff. It takes all of us to make sure that we are able to advance safe schools in this mission. It's one of the reasons why 7 years ago I ran for North Penn School Board. I've been chair of the Safe Schools Committee ever since in my second term. Thank you.
Great. And Jonathan, yeah, we're hoping that our participants learn from your experiences there across the board. You bring a depth of knowledge that I think most don't have at this point in time. And Dr. Bauer, and by the way, Dr. Bauer and Jonathan spoke at the national, the AASA, the Superintendents Association, was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the national conference. We did a 4-hour workshop on the path to safer schools, and some of the insights that you shared were very, very illuminating, to say the least. And we'll talk about that. But Dr. Bauer, would you mind just providing your background, please?
Absolutely, Ara. Thank you. Pleased to be here with these distinguished folks and a lot of familiar names in the audience as well. I have the great pleasure of working with Brandon and Jonathan, quite frankly, each day. My background is that I was a high school math teacher locally, and then I became an assistant principal, where I was a high school assistant principal in a school with 1,800 kids, and then became a high school principal here in North Penn. We have 1,000 kids per grade, so it is a large, comprehensive high school in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And then I became assistant superintendent, served in that role for 4 years, and now this is my third year as superintendent. Just a little background on North Penn in general. We have roughly 100,000 residents, 13,000 students across grades K through 12. We have roughly 2,000 staff members. That's all in. So 18 schools, 22 facilities, and it's a great place to work. We by no means have it perfect, but I do feel wholeheartedly that we get better every day. So happy to answer questions, and don't claim to have all the answers, but that's why we're all part of Zero Now, right? To work together, collaborate, and share ideas. So thanks for having me, Ara.
Exactly, Todd, and that's it. And that's, part of this whole thing is that we're on this journey to safer schools, sharing our experiences along our travels, and that's where I think that this is going to be this is a critical conversation. I just want to remind the participants, if you have a question for Brandon, Jonathan, or Todd, please hit the Q&A button. We'll answer those during the program. We had a bunch of questions that came in during the registrations, but just wanted to remind you, use the Q&A. Dr. Bauer, just start with you. So what would you say the biggest financial challenges that schools face when trying to fund safety initiatives?
So the biggest challenges, and I'm sure we'll get to like strategies for funding later, but the biggest challenges, I would say, quite frankly, are the competing interests. The changes in needs in education. There are the structures themselves, and the infrastructure and the buildings and the costs of construction that are, we have 18 schools and 22 buildings, as I said, and we have several buildings without air conditioning, all those things. So those are millions and millions of dollars, right? Then our enrollment has been pretty steady for the last 10, 15 years in North Penn, but our needs are greater than ever, right? Whether it be special education, mental health. We have our population of our English learners is skyrocketing, and that's a wonderful, beautiful thing. And we celebrate our diversity in the school district every day, but it comes with more student need, right? We need to provide more support. We need more staff to help those needs. And then I would also speak to, you hit the nail on the head right at the top of the hour here, the volatility of the financials in public education right now. Is the money going to be there? Is it not? Is the Department of Education going away? Is it not? And we're fortunate in North Penn. We don't have a huge percentage of our funding coming from federal sources, but there's going to be a trickle down across the board. So and again, we just need to know the rules of the game that we're playing, pardon the phrase, right? Like, it's just nobody knows. And so there's an unpredictable nature. Lastly, I would say that I would point to the fact that to increase funding and increase support for funding, you want to be transparent. But in 2025, in a cancel culture at large, if you're truly transparent about all things school safety, you run the risk of that aspect of the job, and people pushing back and challenging. And rather than investing in the needs and supporting students and staff, they want to weaponize the fact, and I guess I did mean, the pun was intended, weaponize that transparency. So it's such a volatile state in education, whether it be infrastructure, political climate, funding, whatever it is. It's a hard space to be in, but I'm glad that we're in it, and I think we're here for a reason. So those are just off the top of my head, 4 or 5 things that I think make it so difficult.
Well, and Todd, as you mentioned, competing interests. And so Brandon, when it comes time for the safety part of the budget, is that a specific line item in the budget, or do you have some safety aspects in the IT budget, some safety functions in the facilities budget, some in the counseling? So, I mean, how do you structure that in North Penn?
So that's a great question, and I think to some degree, school entities maybe have that same challenge. I am very, very, very fortunate here to be able to have an entire budget dedicated to school safety, which includes necessary resources, technology, capital. So we are self-sufficient from a budgetary standpoint, and I do recognize that organizations across the country do it very differently, right? Some, to your point, have bits and pieces in technology, bits and pieces in student services, bits and pieces in these other departments within the school district. But I will say and try to encourage any school leader that's listening to this live or will listen to this later, if you can, please, look at the needs and dedicating the appropriate resources to your school safety, and giving your school safety leader the ability to function in that space, to make the best of the resources that they have to keep kids safe.
And how did this work? So, I mean, Jonathan, I think you said you were elected 7 years ago. Because the position of a school safety and security director is a relatively new position, correct? I think, Brandon, are you the first in this role in North Penn?
I am not.
Okay.
I am. I believe I'm the second person.
Okay. And so how did you prioritize safety and security funding in the budget with all the other priorities that you have, Jonathan, from a school board perspective?
One portion of that, and so yeah, you're right. I'm in my 8th year, and we were also very fortunate. I was surprised to learn that at least in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I feel across Pennsylvania, I don't know how that is for public districts and independent systems and schools across the country, but we were very fortunate when I came on board that there was already a monthly committee that the board has chartered for safe schools, right? Public session to provide the oversight and have that conversation, and all of us can learn and discuss what the priorities are. So it's important to have a baseline that's simply informed, right? What's the feedback loop? And we've learned, right, here we are in year 8, that's also not enough. There's even more we need to do in this age, right? To make the information digestible, create different pathways for us to convey information, but also hear and listen so that we're responsive. But what we really took a look at, and this is just accepting the fact that, school safety and security, if we can focus as a community, as school board directors on common sense solutions, that safety isn't political. So we try to neutralize, right, the weaponization of it and the division that occurs. And misinformation and disinformation has been something that's quickly evolved, right? That's what drives some of the issues that Todd was talking about today. But starting 7 years ago and where we continue to evolve, it's embracing the fact that we don't have it all figured out, that school safety is a continuously evolving challenge, but also opportunities. Because when done right, you have your school safety budget, and each community and school, as I said, this isn't just about public school districts, but we have members from independents that we heard from last week, and the differences about what it means, whether they use grants or not, and what they're able to access, and the difficulties that they have as well. But also, right, some opportunities to maybe act differently and a little more quickly than some of our state procurement rules. Ultimately, it's, do you have the board oversight and the confidence to be curious? You don't need a school safety expert, but you need engagement. And from that should emanate community engagement. And what brings it all together and facilitates it, Brandon, Todd, cabinet, all the way down to line staff and part-time staff. Do they understand what the vision and mission is? Is it properly funded? If it isn't, how can we get there? And what does that do to set the culture? All right, because without the culture, we're not going to get anywhere. I can give checklists to everyone across the school district. It doesn't mean that we're safer. So it's a bit of a long answer, but I hope that those who are listening realize and probably could say it more concisely than me. It's multidimensional in how we have to approach this, but we need to make it simple for the community to understand, policymakers, and those who work for the schools. So that's what and the budget helps with that because it gives you something to talk about.
And how does that work? So like coming from like a city council perspective, you have the departments submit their requirements to the city manager, which then goes to the council for final approval. How does it work in North Penn, Todd? I mean, does Brandon give you a list? Here's a list of infrastructure needs that we have in security or training programs that we need, and then it goes to you to determine, okay, based on this, I'll work this into the budget, and then we'll bring it back to the school board. What does that process look like at North Penn?
Yeah, I would say we do zero-based budgeting to a degree in North Penn, which for those who aren't familiar, essentially means you start from scratch every year and you kind of build in what you need for the following year. In Pennsylvania, and I know this is nationwide, but in Pennsylvania, we have Act 1, which limits how much you can increase real estate taxes, which is almost our entire budget. Not entirely, but it is close. And so right around this time, a few months ago, January, you start to build your budget, right? And Brandon kind of prioritizes, and we take a look at what his priorities are for the coming year and what we think that our esteemed 9 school board members will be willing, or what their tolerance is for going to that Act 1 number. Next year, it's 4%. 2 years ago, it was 5.3. This past year, it was 4.5. So just to kind of give perspective, the Act 1 index has been pretty high lately. And then we prioritize from there. And we have to look at it holistically. But you have to keep the main thing. And if school safety is one of the pillars of your organization, which it should be in every school district, then that line item, in my view, is at whatever that increase is. So if Brandon's budget 1 year is X number of dollars and the Act 1 index is 4%, the next year it increases by 4%. And if it needs to go up more than that, then where's it coming from? Because before educating, and anything else, it's about safety. So we try to prioritize it in that way when it comes to the budget. I know you have other questions lined up, or to talk about other opportunities and creative solutions, so I'll get to those later.
Yeah, we definitely want to jump into that, but just to continue on that thought, Todd, Brandon, so when assessing all of your safety and security programs and priorities, how do you prioritize that? What is the most critical aspect of safety measures that you, or what tools do you use to assess what is a priority for fiscal year 2026 and beyond?
Sure. So I kind of use I don't know, I guess I'll call it like the Brandon's theory. And it really comes down to physical security, training, resources, and really, what are the trends or the challenges that we are facing. I think we can all agree in education, every year has been a different challenge, right? Where we've had the years of where bomb threats were the big things, and then it was swatting, and then it was sexting, and right. So it's every year seems to be a new thing that we're kind of facing for a good portion of the year. So I kind of look at that formula like, okay, from a physical needs, what do we need from infrastructure, right? Do we need to make changes or upgrades to the building themselves, right? Are we changing locks? Are we adding access control? Are we adding or repurposing or moving cameras, right? And then it's, okay, what training do we need to, not only for the state mandated, but what should we have for what's best for the district? And then looking at, okay, we have, 3,200 kids in our high school, looking at our staffing. Do we have enough staffing? Do we have the right hours? Do we have the right system? And I do that across the other schools. And then that's kind of where I start the framework for the budget. All right. So, okay, if I need to go ask for one more full-time person or a part-time person or a sub, or I need to replace 100 cameras because we're coming up on end of life. I need to look at, okay, for a period of time, this portion of the building wasn't being used for whatever reason, and now next year it's going to be. So what changes do I need to make from a safety and security standpoint to make that portion of the building functional again and give access control and all those kind of things? And then I put all that together and then start to prioritize how do we, right, what's the priority, right, from the most important to, if we get to the point where, okay, I know 4% is my ceiling and I'm already at 6. Where do I start to balance to get to that 4 or below? And then that's kind of
and that's and I'm hearing a lot of what Brandon does before we get our 15-minute budget presentation, right? Or maybe it's 30 because I asked too many questions, but it's interesting as this is being described to understand that at the board level and oversight, but this also comes down to leadership. It doesn't matter what someone's role is in the leadership of a school or district. What are your key performance indicators? How can you manage up, educate your board and your community about the data-informed decisions? You don't always have data-informed decisions, but you want to create an expectation, a community that one of the first things we like to jump to, so to speak, is, well, what's evidence-based? Where is this done before? Is it a promising practice? How can we measure or evaluate what the success is? And that also in the long run is going to help us strategically, as educators, plan so that we're not just reactive. So ultimately, we're protecting students and staff, right, and our schools. Well, at least in Pennsylvania, we need to also protect our local taxpayers who really carry the burden of this. And sadly, when there are terrible tragedies which occur, we want to make sure, I like to think that there's an established expectation that when we talk about this in a Safe Schools Committee or one-on-one or in emails, that we're able to say how the district plans and spends ahead of time in the investments so that we're not all of a sudden rushing to put armed guards at every door or a metal detector at every door or whatever the shiny thing might be, and the 100 emails we get from vendors saying they have the solution. It's really our job to make sure that the community is educated and we're voting for those things that we are confident likely reduce risk or increase protective factors. That matters.
No, Todd, please.
Yeah. All right. So something that you actually, I know you referenced that we spoke at the AASA conference in New Orleans 2 weeks ago at this point. But one thing that I think is really important when it comes to budgeting, and this seems maybe counterintuitive, is we moved Brandon's role from a support staff position to an administrative position, and now he's actually in the superintendent's cabinet. So he's, to borrow from Hamilton, he is in the room where it happens, right? And so when he wants to budget for 100 cameras because he thinks those cameras are coming end of life, and he talks about it in a cabinet meeting, now our director of technology is in the room, and she's like, well, you understand that you need to buy new PoE switches, which is power over Ethernet, for those 100 cameras, right? And the connectivity with our technology department, he's in the room now when we talk about curricular changes and professional development. And, oh, wait, we're going to need time for this with school safety. Really, really important to have him be a part of those conversations. And like, Brandon's great and all, but I'm really talking about the position, right? Not Brandon. It's important to have the director of school safety in the room to discuss things like curriculum, like helping students in our special education program. All our communications, our director of communications is in those meetings, facilities meetings. He's in so we're about to embark upon a $260 million renovation of our high school. It's a 550,000 square foot building. Brandon's in all the construction meetings, right? Because if we're fully integrating school safety, he's got to be, when we design a classroom, he's got to be in the room. So I really think that's important, and it doesn't on the surface look like it's about budget, but it is. Like, he needs to be a part of those conversations.
And I think what that also represents is that you have a champion for your Safe Schools program. Yes, a superintendent is going to be, and a principal is, and a teacher cares more than anyone about those students in the classroom. But where is the bandwidth in any size school to make sure, right? Todd, or superintendent, is not going to be out there doing the vulnerability assessment. Who's going to be coordinating with local first responders, looking at the plan, seeing that our doors are numbered? It's an awful lot of work. And that's where the budget needs to set the priority. And sadly, many districts across the country have difficulty funding these positions. It's why Zero Now exists, the National Council for School Safety Directors, is to say, well, what is the priority? If you've got a curriculum director, very important, you probably have an athletic director. Well, let's ask a question of a board or the community or state legislators who may or may not be funding at the proper levels. Should we have a school safety director? Because there's a lot of talk. Let's see some action. And that's what the budget represents.
Exactly. And that's such an important point, Todd, is, as a cultural thing, if you truly embrace a culture of safety, having the safety director as a cabinet level position is absolutely critical. Brandon, what are your thoughts on that? I feel like you need a cape, man. You're like a superhero with all this talk here.
No, I'm just a guy. Just a guy that enjoys the work. I will say there's also, when we talk about the funding piece, and you talk about, Dr. Bauer talk about the Act One index and where does the money come from, and ultimately it comes from taxpayers. And ultimately when you think about having to raise a community member's taxes, right, the first thing they want to know is, well, where's it going? What is my money going to? And I think, one of the things that we do really well here is communicate to the community through our monthly Safe Schools meeting so that they understand the work that we're doing, right? So when those numbers come out and it's like, okay, my taxes are going up X number of dollars, right? Nobody's really happy, right? Most people aren't jumping for joy and clicking their heels, but they understand, right? It's not like, well, my taxes are going up, but I don't, where's it going? Like, what do we have for it? What are we showing for it? And so when you can produce those things, again, whether it's personnel or enhancing your ability to be able to quickly expedite an investigation because of a assistance tool that allowed you to get to a resolution, right? Then you can report on those things and say, we purchased this, right? We're using this tool, and here's the ROR on this tool that we got, right? That's directly connected to the funding source.
Jonathan.
And also, this is where no matter what the means are of a school system or a school itself, being able to have an honest enough conversation. We all know here what the disclaimer is, right? About what we don't disclose in meetings or in budgets. However, it's the ability to be able to reference that it's always there. It's not just during budget season. And that's where the monthly meetings help out. Because at times some issues might come up or solutions that we want to look at more closely. But is there a habit within the board and the district of methodically trying to process and understand what it is before it makes an investment with limited funds? And how's that fit into the larger vision and mission and strategy? And we've learned, we've had bumps along the way, what that means to truly, right? It's one thing for us to have the meetings every month. Doesn't mean that people have the time, the energy, the focus to always pay attention. Now, one of the things we did early on, I think, a day after we got sworn in as a new board leadership, we made sure that every regular meeting for anything that the board does is recorded. But that means the Safe Schools and the finance meetings are recorded. And we can reference that to people when they ask or when we're challenged. And I don't look at a challenge as a bad thing. That's an opportunity to engage and educate our community members. Then we can actually show and not tell. It's also important in part of this process. Occasionally we'll have the district attorney's office or local law enforcement, first responders, and others talk about what we do. Because sometimes in a community, in this day and age, as Todd said, you're going to have different perceptions, but having that independent voice that's maybe not just the school or the district helps to validate and reinforce some of the investments and budget decisions you make. And lastly, I would put out there, that's where it's really important for a board, and I would say a district, to invest in independent objective assessments. Not everyone can have a role such as Brandon's. And even when you do, we don't want to have any single points of failure. It's important. I always remember Max Schachter, who talked about his son, Alex, who he lost in Parkland. Right? They had all zeros for crime for years. They had a behavioral threat assessment program. As Max said, it was a paper tiger. So every once in a while, it's not to insult our administration, but as a board, we've been committed to occasionally getting the right experts to take a look at the important aspects of our program, because it's not our job to get into the weeds as a board, but we can get that type of oversight information. And that's important. I know not everyone has the money, and that's part of talking about the grants or the police relationships, right? There's other ways to try to get that type of third-party review into your school safety program.
Dr. Bauer, one of the things that jumped out at me at the National Conference on Education program a couple of weeks ago was how you communicate, and Brandon mentioned that, having regular Safe Schools meetings with parents. But the question is there a concern, and this is more, once again, a cultural thing, about being too transparent? And a couple examples, years ago, 15 years ago, when the first anonymous tipping system started coming out, we heard from principals at schools, we don't want to implement this because parents are going to wonder, why are we having an anonymous tipping system? Is there a problem at our school? Or is there an issue? Or, for example, like at a major school site with weapons detection, there's 70. Do you tell parents, we detected 77 firearms on the properties, all of our properties in the past year, which led to X amount of police involvement. All that. How transparent should you be? How transparent, what do you recommend as far as getting parents on the same page with you to help demonstrate the ROI, like Brandon mentioned, when it comes to your safety and security investment?
Yeah, really good point, and something that an area in which I've needed to grow over the years. And I will give, I don't want to give too many compliments, but I will give Jonathan a compliment for as a board director in pushing us to have a regular cadence to our sharing of the information, right? So a regular cadence of sharing discipline data. And that includes weapons. It includes sexual assault. It includes like scary things. As a parent, I have a middle school child and a high school child myself, not in this district. But we share that data on a quarterly basis in a public forum. We show trends year after year. And there are sometimes we're like, yeah, this has gone up a lot. And here's what we think about that. Why? A really good example that I shared at that conference, a simple one, class cuts went up. And they went up big time in the first semester of this year compared to the last 2 years. Why? We implemented a change in the cell phone policy, right? No cell phones in class, and we used to be far more flexible. And this is way before like every kid had a computer, right? So we're a 1-to-1 district. Everybody has all the technology they need. They don't need their cell phones. And of course, there's plenty of data to support not having cell phones in schools. So we made a change. Well, why would class cuts go up? Well, because kids go to the bathroom to use their phones. Right? Because they can't do it in class, so they're hiding, and then they end up, 1 minute turns into 30, and all of a sudden they cut class. So that's a very simple, harmless example compared to a more violent or concerning trend. But when that story hits that, oh, there's so many fights at such and such school, or that's a dangerous environment. And you can say, well, actually, rather than at the next meeting defending yourself and being on your heels and showing the data, you can say, well, we've shown this data the last 4 years, every 3 months, and here are the trends. So I think it really helps to tell the story. That does not mean when you have an incident that's highly publicized that the court of public opinion won't go a certain direction. It doesn't mean that. It's not like, a perfect solution, but at least you can fall back on the fact that, you know what? We're not being reactionary. We were proactive. We share this regularly. We're as transparent as possible. So Jonathan, I see you're going to jump in.
And I appreciate your description of that, Todd. I feel that whether it was by design or not, having this cadence now, right, because we're talking about budgeting and sustained funding, it also allows for the opportunity not to look at the state mandated stale data that we don't even know how accurate it is because no one's really digging into it throughout the year. We're able to see within a school year. And I know that on a building to building level, not just aggregate as the board sees it, it's used as a process improvement and as part of management of building leaders to look at the data and say, where do we need to surge some resources? Because quarter over quarter, we're starting to see a certain trend here by location or by incident or maybe district-wide. Once again, data-informed decisions that maybe the public doesn't have to sit there through every meeting, but we can make sure that we can show our homework when we do talk about the decisions and the allocations that are made.
So we're more than halfway through, and we have a lot of questions to get to. But Dr. Bauer, I just want to go back to you. You brought this up earlier about creating creative funding solutions. How do you allocate funds for school safety and security initiatives in non-traditional ways without going your traditional routes of grants, which are really for one-time capital expenses? But what's your approach?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, that the grants are for one-time capital expenses in general, right? They're for purchases of cameras, purchase of a vehicle, and too often I think people try to use grant monies to pay for people. But there's obviously a sustained cost that comes with hiring staff, right? And we live in a world where it's not easy to decrease your staff. So utilizing grant monies for things, not people, is the most basic budgeting expertise that I can offer. But in terms of creative solutions, I really have to point to enhancing your community partnerships really can help you solve some of your biggest challenges from a school safety standpoint. And I do see some folks in the participants who are school safety partners with us here in North Penn and Montgomery County. But the ability to create relationships, here's a simple example, Ara. We have an organization in Lansdale, which is where the North Penn School District office is, called Manna on Main. And it is a food pantry. It's an organization that provides food for the hungry. And we have worked with them and enhanced our partnership over the years. And we thought, you know what? The punitive measures of detention, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, that doesn't always work. Maybe we can create opportunities for kids when they're cutting class or when they're vaping or whatever it is, and maybe they could go give back to our community. So we partnered with them, and now students go there to serve some of their discipline consequences. But then they're giving back to the community and they're working with us, and then they partnered with us in other ways as a result, right? So you're making your school in turn safer because of a relationship you made with a food pantry, because kids are going, they're volunteering, they're building relationships, and it's making an impact on their life. We've partnered with the NAACP locally, and they run a program in one of our middle schools to help create a mentor program for young men of color. Again, it's not money out of our budget, but it's a relationship that we can work together and try to help certain students in our school safety population. So just those are some examples. Our partnerships, we brought in folks from the county Brandon partnered with, and they came in and did a tabletop exercise over the summer with all 18 buildings. It's just about leveraging those resources. We all want to work together to keep kids safe. So if you go the extra mile to build the relationship, you never know what doors will open.
And Jonathan, would you consider your safety initiatives sustainable? Is this part of your school budget presently and in the future? And what are your plans at a school board level to make sure that is sustainable long term?
Well, part of that sustainability is having a vision for what safe schools are or should be, so that we develop a strategy, right? Because from the vision comes mission, and then goals, and then tasks, right? And it goes right down the line. So we get down to the building level, and even we're able to, if that's clear, bring in our community volunteers, right? And families understand where we're pulling in the same direction. For a board at that level and an administration and partnership, it's understanding that. So, right, the cost that it would take to change all the locks in all of our buildings district-wide is not something that you plan for in 1 year. It takes many years. The cameras that Brandon spoke about. So what are we doing in conjunction with long-term facilities planning to make sure that where we dovetail that with technology as well, with the chief technology officer and other investments, that has to be a front of mind, right? Not once a year exercise that the superintendent and the cabinet need to conduct and that the board needs to learn about. And when you have that vision and mission, you're also less likely to stray from it. It doesn't mean that you don't change direction where you need to, but it also helps if your representatives are truly in touch with and understand what a majority of the community desires. What can we do to facilitate that happening? Well, that's a long-term plan. And so you make sure that that's in place and it's not arbitrary. And that's where everything else we discussed undergirds that. And it goes beyond just a school safety budget, but understanding what are the areas in your budget that support school safety and security, that help climate, but don't have a line item at all. Right. For us, our school climate coordinators in every building. Brandon, I don't think that's part of your category, and other investments that we still need to understand. These decisions aren't made in a vacuum, and the community needs to be aware of that as well.
Brandon.
Yeah. One of the things, when Dr. Bauer talks about, those partnerships. So, tying this back to funds and resources, we have a great partnership with our DA's office running a YAT program, student aid panel, and so youth aid panel. And so what that has allowed us to do is the DA's office has partnered with us. We have trained panelists to be able to run those meetings. To Dr. Bauer's point, talking about the partnership, connecting that with Manna on Main, right? So a student commits a low level offense. They accept responsibility of it. Instead of a harsher, more punitive, they go, yes, I did that. I was wrong. I should not have done that. I understand what I did was wrong and why. Okay, so we can partner with YAP. And so what that has allowed us to do when you talk about, creative ways for funding is the programming, the training, and the running of that program through a partnership came at no cost to the district. And so now you're not shelling out funds to run that, right? And you can allocate funds to other things where maybe you have to come out of your pocket because of whatever the need is, just doesn't allow for a partnership to be gained through that. So we utilize this wonderful opportunity through this partnership in the DA's office and again, it came at no cost to the district, a wonderful program that allows money to be reallocated somewhere else where you have to fork out some spendings.
And we will at least quarterly find out about recidivism rate, success, and we continue to evaluate the program. And it does help climate because youth who go into the juvenile justice system that shouldn't be in the juvenile justice system is going to take a long time for any resolution. At the building level, the community level, family level, we're able to, in a sense, fast track, not by forcing it, but this creates a better, more responsive accountability so students can actually get the resources they need and still be beneficial in the school towards the school community.
So I just want to circle back to Brandon. Excuse me. So Dr. Bauer, Jonathan, you're talking about grants are great for one-time capital projects specifically, but sustainable long-term funding is more for headcount, staff. And what does your safety team look like in North Penn, Brandon? What is it? Is it just you? Do you have full responsibility for all the schools, or do you have staff or support teams? What does that look like?
So we are a department within the school district. There are 32 members of that department total. That includes full-time, part-time, and subs. So we have, for instance, there are 8 members at the high school who share, responsibility for that massive facility and the campus. So there are team members spread out throughout the district. There's an individual who has responsibility for the elementary schools, our patrol officer who is out visiting every elementary school throughout the course of days, some schools twice a day, and also handling calls of service. So there are, resources out there, manpower to help foster that environment that's conducive to learning by making sure folks are safe.
And since you brought that up, I'm going to give a quick plug for the National Council of School Safety Directors and Zero Now's Foundations of School Security Leadership Certification Program, which we're underway right now for the very first, it's kind of, I don't call it dress rehearsal, the first run through, but it's going to be made available nationally later this summer for anyone to take. But the idea here, whoever's responsible or the team that's responsible for school safety and security could take this online course and get a certificate for it, but it really provides a big, broad overview of what is really should be incorporated with a holistic approach to school safety, which we advocate for here. So, that type of stuff, that's important. I know, Brandon, you're on the leadership of the National Council of School Safety Directors. So I think this is going to be a major step forward as far as getting people up to speed. And then we're actually in the process of creating a more an executive level 90-minute program for school board directors, superintendents, and lawmakers to get that high level view of what is involved with holistic school safety. Because right now, most school board directors, superintendents, lawmakers do not have a background on school safety and security, yet they're responsible for making policy decisions, funding decisions on school safety initiatives. And if you don't have that broad understanding. How can you do your job effectively? So that's just wanted to, thanks for the heads up on that, Brandon, for bringing that up. So just wanted to bring that up. All right, we have a few more minutes left. I'm going to take some questions that came in here. If you have questions for Dr. Bauer, Jonathan, or Brandon, please type it into the questions here. We do have a question here, and whoever wants to answer this, please feel free to jump it in. Why isn't there more funding for proactive initiatives? It seems like they're all reactive grants. And is there a risk? And this is, as far as leadership is concerned, is there a risk in being that visionary early adopter when being proactive? I know, Dr. Bauer, you mentioned, being proactive. Is there a risk with that? Because I understand that most school districts and leaders would rather wait and see how does it work everywhere, everywhere else, and then we'll do it when it's further designed down the way. But Todd, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I do think there's a risk, but I think to kind of hit home everything we've been talking about, the transparency, the constant communication about these things, it really tells the story. And you can fall back on, okay, well, we did it for the right reasons. It was evidence-based, data-based, and that didn't work out. We are in the advantageous position in North Penn that we're the largest school district in a very large county in Pennsylvania. We're not the largest school district in the state, but we're one of the bigger that is in a suburban environment. And a lot of school districts look to us just because of our size. We have a lot more resources than the smaller school districts. And with that comes obvious advantages, but also some responsibility. So I do think we are the ones in many cases taking those risks, but it is not haphazard. It is research-based. Sometimes we borrow from other industries. We borrow from higher education, from our local experts in other fields. So yes, there's risk, but I think if you fall back on the sincere research and data to substantiate the moves, then when you fall short and you can explain it and stand behind the kind of the impetus behind it in the first place.
Speaking of transparency, we happen to have a resident Clery Act expert. Jonathan served as the executive director of the Clery Center for a number of years. And higher education has required transparency for crimes and safety-related issues. Do you see anything like that happening on the K through 12 side?
The demand is there from families, students, and staff. There's no denying it. I haven't seen the legislative, speaking generally, have not seen the legislative wherewithal or attention. To that point, there's a lot on bang and what's right of it. There's not enough attention, and this is from the media, from the dialogue, from the 100 emails we get when tragedies occur about the prevention piece. And that's because prevention doesn't need millions of dollars in technology. And perhaps there's technology that absolutely reinforces and helps. But a lot of the investments that could be made don't cost anything or don't cost much. It's about focus and sustainability. And the Clery Act in particular is about a common sense framework with a lot of information that's shared with the community. But ultimately, it says, these are your expectations. We're not going to tell you what to do from the federal government, but you will share with the community how soon you will let your community know about an emergency, who will make the decision. If there's a pattern of certain types of crimes on your controlled property, how long will it take for you to identify the issue and then make sure that families know about it? And this is really about just being an American citizen. Are you a second-class citizen getting information in real time so you can make decisions or demand change in your schools? Or are you a second-class citizen who, for whatever reason, doesn't have that information and is in the dark about what the strength or the weaknesses, the deficiencies might be in your safety and security program? And that's where Safe Schools for Alex and Max Schachter, they're really leading the charge with a research-based University of Florida program that will have dashboards for every state across the country. In a lot of ways, that's headed in a direction of what the Clery Act does in providing 3 full calendar years worth of crime incident data at any institution of higher education nationally. Some of us would like to see the best elements of the Clery Act cherry-picked for certain state legislation, maybe someday federal. And I have to admit, our model legislation for the Path to Safe Schools has some elements from the Clery Act that I think are very strong, and most communities across the country would agree to. And we hope that that's one element that our state legislators pay attention to.
And the reason why I brought that up, and going back to what we're all discussing earlier, is transparency, right? Keeping parents and the community in the loop. This is what we are doing to increase safety and security in our schools. Here's some data on what has happened, and we our goal is to get to 0 victims. I mean, that's our common goal here in Zero Now. But that the whole point of transparency is absolutely critical. Dr. Bauer.
If I might add, my favorite line, I boil it down for the one PowerPoint I've done for a decade, right? In parentheses, right? Communication plus transparency multiplied by data, which has to be good, equals accountability at all levels. And that's the accountability we want to create for our community.
So speaking of communication, Ara, and to Jonathan's point, like in some cases, I think we over communicate. A great example is on Friday, we had a student who is a kindergartner tell a friend sitting next to him on the bus, I have a gun in my backpack. Well, it was a blue and orange Nerf dart, one single shot, right? I mean, it's this big. It is clearly not a weapon. It is clearly not a gun. But you don't know how that narrative is going to go home, right? And kids on the bus hear this. And so rather than be accused of hiding or not communicating or whatever it is, I heard there was a gun on the bus. Why didn't you tell us? We just tell everything. And we're as straightforward as we can be. And we'll say, it was reported to us that a student told another classmate that he had this on him. Security met the bus at the school and searched the student's backpack. He was found to have a Nerf toy in his backpack. The family of that student were contacted, came to the school. That student will not be in school for the remainder of the day. Something very simple. We don't believe we're violating any rights by saying the student won't be in school because there are 28 other kids in the room who know the student's not in school, right? But we just try to communicate everything. I know some of my colleagues around the county or elsewhere, they don't really share much of that. If we find a knife on a kid, we say it. A student was found in possession of a knife today. And that way, at least we can, you do run the risk of people becoming callous to such messages. But I would rather people delete an email where we communicated than us be accused of not communicating. Just to kind of drive home that point, we have to be transparent, share the story, it's annoying that we're sending the third message this week about a knife in one of our schools. 9 times out of 10, it's completely harmless. It was an accident, a mistake. And we say it was an accident. It was a mistake.
Yeah, Todd, I mean, we just talked about this last month, the whole concept of disinformation, because if you're not communicating, then you're not controlling the narrative. And you're right, the word will get out that there was a knife in school and it was, there might have been attempted use of that if you're not communicating. But that goes back to, broader communications. If it's an emergency, you could text, parents and all that. But if it's general information for transparency's sake, send an email. At least you're in the loop. I guess you could give folks they could opt out of the email if they really wanted to. But I think that's critical. Over what we learned last month is you can't over communicate, but it's great that you are. Robert Clark. So yes, we are. This video will be available next week. It'll also be available via podcast. We're running low on time here. So what I'd love to do is give each of you an opportunity to leave some final thoughts and words of wisdom for our participants. I think we covered a lot here as far as, and what's interesting, this conversation was about sustainable funding, and we really did not focus on grants and all different grant programs because those are certainly out there, but we really focused on being transparent, sharing your safety information with your parents and community so they have buy-in, right? They have buy-in for your school safety and security program, creating sustainable funding from within. Capital projects are awesome for grants, for one-offs, but as far as long-term sustainable, you got to put it in the budget, create a line item in your budget for safety. We got a little bit in IT, we got a little bit in facilities, we got a little bit in counseling. There should be a line item. Key takeaway. And so, Jonathan, we'll start with you for your final thoughts and words of wisdom.
Well, what comes to mind for me is if you want a sustainable funding program for safe schools, you need to sustain a conversation with your community. Starts there.
That's a great takeaway. Yep. Sustainable conversation with the community. I think Dr. Bauer would agree with that. What are your final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I failed to mention during my intro and at the conference hour, I didn't provide Mary with a bio either. So it seems as though I fail with the intro part. But my doctoral dissertation was in teacher and administrator perceptions of school resource officers in suburban comprehensive high schools outside of Philadelphia. And it's shocking to this wonderful school safety community that the role is optimized when the individual in that role is building relationships with kids, right? And getting to know kids and getting to fully integrating into the culture of the high school, for example, going to sporting events and just being a member of the community. And so, like Jonathan said, it starts with the sustained conversation all the way down to the, one-on-one student connection. Build a relationship with the kids, with the school culture, build a relationship with your administrative team, with your school board, and ultimately with the larger community, then the support will be there. And those creative, sustained means of funding will exist.
And the good news is that culture and relationships have a very, very low price tag in your budget, right? Very low. And like Jonathan said, the goal here is to focus on being left of bang, preventing an event, providing support for at-risk students well before ideation or things start going on that path. And nobody knows that better than Brandon Rhone. Brandon, what are your final thoughts for our participants today?
Sure. Thanks. Just want to again say thanks for the opportunity to sit on this panel today. What I will say is, too often times we don't think about these things until that tragedy, right? And then we try to hurry up and put some thoughts together and gather some time and sit people down at the table. As a national trainer across the country, I've said this thousands of times, right? When the time to perform has come, the time to prepare has passed. And I think we need to prioritize school safety just like we do test scores and curriculum and textbooks and all the things for the business that we do in school safety. But again, to the point that I think Dr. Bauer mentioned earlier on the top of the hour, if kids aren't safe, if kids don't feel safe, they're not learning, right? They're worried about what might happen or looking over their shoulder, and they're focused on other things and not on the classroom and the textbook and the whiteboard or the overhead projector or the teacher, the program. They're not focusing on any of that, right? If they're hungry, if they don't feel safe, if they're cold, if they're wet, they're not learning. And so as long as we prioritize those things and making sure that we are providing a safe environment that's conducive for learning, the academic piece will all fall in the line and things will align. And that's not to say that you'll never have something go wrong, but if you have preparation, from prevention through response through recovery, that's the winning formula.
Absolutely. No, that's great, Brandon. And I agree 100%. And this is, Dr. Bauer mentioned this earlier, about, accountability and cancel culture and everything. But the thing is, nothing is perfect. Nobody's perfect. And if you put together as many layers of safety and security systems, starting with culture and people and relationships, that is a layer of safety and security. We don't look at it from that perspective typically, but it really is a critical layer. And then you get into your physical security layers, your cameras and duress and everything else. But that's why it's so important to look at this holistically. And that's why conversations like this are absolutely critical. So thank you, Brandon, Jonathan, Dr. Bauer. Just want to remind our folks, our next discussion. So next month, our zero-in topic is all about culture, right? About culture and moving away from fear and building a positive culture. And part of the whole Zero Now community is we take on a different topic every month. But there's these common themes that tie this all together. Culture is certainly an aspect of every single aspect of school safety. So April 15th, 2:00. We'll see everyone back in the community. We'll have this recording available within the next week. But if you have any other questions for our guests, you could do that in the community. So thank you, Brandon Rhone, Jonathan Kassa, Dr. Todd Bauer. We'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.